You're being lied to about immigration. Your governments and prime ministers are refusing to tax the rich accordingly, but then they tell you that immigrants are the problems, while simultaneously spending 50 to 100 million pounds on Prince Charles's coronation. So in this video, I'll be breaking down myths about immigration, what immigration actually is, the difference between immigration and refugees, and also the illegal immigrants. So the first thing you have to know about immigration is economic contributions. Immigrants contribute significantly to the UK economy. They work in industries like healthcare, construction, and hospitality. The NHS, for example, relies heavily on foreign aid. Around 14% of NHS staff are not British. Studies show that immigrants are less likely to claim benefits than UK-born citizens. Immigrant businesses contributed approximately 6.6 billion to the UK economy in 2019 alone. A study by University College London, UCL, found that European Economic Area immigrants contributed 20 billion more in taxes than they took in benefits between 2001 and 2011. The confusion of illegal immigration is that people think illegal immigrants are just arriving on boats ready to unalive anyone that they see, but immigrants for the most part are just people who overstay their visa. Number two is refugees versus economic migrants. Many people confuse refugees with economic migrants. Refugees flee war, persecution, and human rights abuses under international law. The UK takes fewer refugees compared to other European countries. In 2022, Germany accepted 224,000 asylum seekers, while the UK took in 74,000. Refugees are not just looking to scrounge off the UK system. Many of them are people who have lost their homes due to war or even being unsafe in their home countries. The UK, just like any other country, has a legal and moral obligation to protect these people. Crime and immigration. So there is no strong evidence that immigration increases crime. In fact, studies suggest that immigrants are less likely to commit crimes than UK-born citizens. As a matter of fact, due to the harsh laws for immigrants, even getting a speeding ticket could impede on your ability on getting a UK citizenship. So a lot of immigrants really do stay away from crime. Some politicians like to fake the support for women in the country only if it helps them justify irrational injustices against certain groups. Statistics show that in England and Wales, 98% of convicted sex offenders were men, and a vast majority of them were British. The populist movement, that is Reform UK, love to use immigrants as a scapegoat when it comes to the protection of women, whilst having a genuine sex offender on their board. Number four is media and political fear-mongering. Politicians and certain media outlets, The Sun, use immigration as a scapegoat for economic struggles, NHS crisis, and housing shortages, problems often caused by government policies rather than migrants. Misinformation spreads quickly, leading to fear and hostility. The UK has housing shortages, but that's due to government policies, not refugees. This isn't the sole reason for refugee crisis. British foreign policy, military interventions, and colonial history have contributed to instability in several regions. So I'll tell you how the UK has contributed to the UK refugees crisis. So number one, military interventions and wars. Iraq 2003. The UK joined the US-led invasion of Iraq, which led to years of conflicts and the rise of extremist groups like ISIS. Many of Iraqis were displaced. Afghanistan 2001 to 2021. The UK was part of a NATO coalition that occupied Afghanistan for 20 years. After withdrawal in 2021, the Taliban regained control, forcing many Afghans, especially women and minorities, to flee. Libya 2011. The UK participated in NATO airstrikes that helped overthrow Gaddafi. This led to a power vacuum, ongoing civil war, and Libya becoming a hub for human trafficking and migration towards Europe. Number two is colonial history and artificial borders. It doesn't take a genius to tell you about British colonial history, but British colonization played a huge role in shaping a lot of the conflicts that persist today. Arbitrary borders drawn by colonial powers led to ethnic tensions and instability. Examples is the Middle East, East Africa, South Asia. Most of these maps that were made were just made by European colonizers, just randomly. There was no plan or anything. They were just trying to divide which parts to take over, and it created a lot of tension between the people who were already on that land. The UK's role in Palestine before Israel's creation contributed to long-standing Israeli-Palestinian conflict, genocide actually. Yeah, it's a genocide, not even a conflict, which has displaced millions of Palestinians. Three, arms sales and support for authoritarian regimes. Yeah. The UK sells weapons to countries involved in conflicts to create refugees, such as Saudi Arabia, which has been bombing Yemen since 2015. The war has caused one of the worst humanitarian crises with millions displaced. The UK has also supported dictators and oppressive regimes, example, Egypt, Sudan, and the Gulf states, and quite a lot of African countries too, actually. That suppress a lot of the citizens and it causes them to flee. The UK has contributed to conflicts that displace people, yet its government and media demonize refugees fleeing from those same wars. Instead of taking responsibility, they portray migrants as a burden. So there are widespread rumors that refugees are living in this lavish, amazing lifestyle in England whilst the British citizens are suffering. Life as a refugee in the UK can be incredibly difficult. Despite the perception that asylum seekers come from an easy life, many face poverty, hostility, and extremely slow asylum system. So here's what reality looks like for these asylum seekers. Number one, the asylum process is a long, stressful wait. Refugees who arrive in the UK must apply for asylum, meaning that they ask for protection because they cannot return home safely. The UK government often takes months or even years to process asylum claims, leaving people in limbo. During this time, asylum seekers are not allowed to work, meaning they must survive on government support. There's going to be government support. Number two, living conditions. poverty and poor housing. So referring to the first point about government support, asylum seekers only get £47 per week, which is around £677 per day, to cover food, transport, and other needs. Many of the people are placed in cramped, poor quality housing in areas which are highly deprived. Some live in hotels or military-style barracks, often overcrowded and unsuitable for long-term living. But for some reason, people have been convinced they live in five-star hotels. Reports show that some housing provided by private companies are dirty, unsafe, and just infested with rats. Number three is mental health struggles. Many refugees suffer from PTSD, depression, and anxiety after fleeing war. You know what I mean? Persecution and violence. The uncertainty of the asylum case makes their mental health even worse. Some people wait 5+ years for a decision. The government's hostile environment increases their stress and fear. So speaking about hostile environment leads to point number 4, facing racism and hostility. Right-wing media and politicians often demonize refugees, blaming them for economic problems, crime, or stealing jobs. Hate crimes against migrants have increased, with refugees facing verbal abuse, discrimination, or even violence. The far-right protests outside asylum hotels creating a climate of fear. Countries that taken refugees for several reasons, including legal, moral, economic, and historical obligations. So here's why countries taking immigrants. Number 1, it's a legal obligation, international law. In 1951, the Refugee Convention, signed by the UK and many other countries, states that nations must protect refugees who flee persecution, war, or violence. Under this law, countries cannot send refugees back to places where their lives are in danger. The UK and other developed nations helped create these laws after World War II, recognizing the need to protect displaced people. Number 2, it's a moral and humanitarian responsibility. Basic human rights. Refugees are often fleeing war, torture, or political persecution. Helping them is a fundamental humanitarian duty. Many conflicts that cause refugee crisis have links to Western nations, like wars in Iraq or Afghanistan or even Libya. Ignoring refugees leads to humanitarian disasters. Number 3 is global stability and diplomacy. Countries that host too many refugees without support, like Lebanon and Turkey, face economic and political strain. Wealthier nations accepting refugees share the responsibility instead of leaving the poorer countries to bear the burden. Number 4 is historical responsibility. Many of the world's conflicts today are linked to colonization, foreign interventions, and arms sales from Western countries. Countries like UK, France, and US have played roles in shaping unstable regions. Taking in refugees is a way to take responsibilities for past actions and support global recovery. Rejecting refugees isn't just unethical, it creates long-term problems like illegal migration, human trafficking, and regional instability. Accepting and integrating refugees benefits both them and the host country. So here are some myths and arguments used against refugees, and here's how you can counter them pretty much. So number 1 is refugees are just economic migrants looking for a better life. Refugees are legally different from economic migrants. Refugees flee war or human rights abuses. They have no choice but to leave. Economic migrants move for better job opportunities, while refugees seek safety and survival. Under international law, refugees must be given protection, while economic migrants go through standard immigration processes. Number 2 is one of the funniest one. The UK is full, we can't take any more refugees. The counter argument to that is the UK takes in far less refugees than any other countries. You know, not any other countries, but most countries with the stability that UK has. In 2023, the UK received 75,000 asylum applications, far fewer than Germany, which had 200,000, and France, which had 160,000. Countries like Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan host millions of refugees with far fewer resources. The UK has housing shortages, but that's due to government policies, not refugees. Number 3 is refugees take jobs from British people. So refugees aren't allowed to work whilst waiting for asylum decisions. The UK bans asylum seekers from working whilst their claims are being processed, which can actually take up to 5 years. Once granted status, many have to work in sectors with labour shortages because they're just looking for a new job, which is the NHS, care work and construction, which is honestly very, you call them key workers in the lockdown days, but they're pretty much key workers. Refugees often create jobs by starting businesses and boosting local economies, as we see currently. Number 4 is refugees come here and live off benefits. Counter argument. Most refugees want to work but are prevented from doing so. Asylum seekers receive just £47.39 per week to survive. That's less than £7 a day. Once granted refugee status, they are more likely to work than British-born citizens. Yeah, that's right. The UK spends more on tax breaks for the rich than on refugee support. Number 5 is they should stay and fight for their country. Counter argument. Many refugees can't fight or have already lost everything. Many are women, children, and elderly, not fighters. Wars often involve brutal dictatorships, ethnic persecution, and terrorism, whilst fighting back literally just means certain death. Most anti-refugee arguments are based on fear, misinformation, and political scapegoating. Educating people with facts and humanizing refugees through personal stories can actually shift opinions. So I'd like to introduce myself again. I'm Kelvin, and I'm an immigrant.